At the family dinner, everything felt normal: clinking forks, soft jazz, my mom adjusting the napkins like the world was still intact. Then Grandpa raised his glass, smiled at me, and asked, "How's the apartment I got you?" My throat tightened. I blinked. "What apartment?" I whispered. The room froze. My mom went pale. My dad stared into his plate like it held the answers. Silence crashed over us like a wave, sharp, suffocating. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, not from wine, but from realization. That one question shattered the illusion my family had spent years crafting. And in the minutes that followed, beneath the chandelier and roast chicken, the truth began to unravel, not gently, not quietly, but with the kind of force that leaves nothing standing. I didn't plan to ruin dinner, but I wasn't going to swallow lies anymore. I could feel every pair of eyes on me like heat lamps, waiting, watching, hoping I'd laugh and say, "Oh, that apartment," and fix what had just cracked in the air. But I didn't. "I live in a converted attic above a dry cleaner," I said, my voice steady but low. "The walls sweat when it rains. There's no heat, and the window doesn't open." Grandpa blinked. "But I gave your dad $75,000. He told me he helped you get a place right after graduation." My mom's fork scraped her plate. My dad looked away. His jaw twitched, and still, no one spoke. I looked at him directly. "You told me you couldn't help, that I needed to build character." The memory felt sour in my throat. I could still hear his voice from 2 years ago when I asked for help with rent. "Figure it out, Lena. You're not a child anymore." Grandpa leaned forward, elbows on the table now, not bothering with his napkin. "Daniel, is this true?" Dad gave a little scoff and waved his hand, like the question annoyed him. "We talked about helping her, but she was insistent on doing it herself, independent." I laughed once, hollow. "I begged you for help, and you said I was entitled." Mom cleared her throat. "Maybe this isn't the time." "No, Mom," I interrupted. "Maybe this is the only time anyone's actually listening." The room was still. My aunt put her glass down with a soft clink. My cousin stopped chewing. Even the toddler at the end of the table went quiet, like some primal instinct told her the adults were in danger. "I've been living paycheck to paycheck for 4 years," I said. "Eating dinner on the floor, selling my artwork for grocery money, and the whole time, I thought no one cared." "I cared," Grandpa said quickly, his voice shaking. "I thought I was helping. I thought you were safe." I looked at him, really looked. And for the first time, I saw something I hadn't expected. Heartbreak. Not the kind you show. The kind that breaks quietly, from behind the eyes. Dad stood suddenly, muttering something about needing air, but Grandpa raised a hand. "Sit down." It wasn't a yell. It didn't have to be. Dad hesitated, then sat. And that was the moment I knew. We were done pretending. There was no going back to silence, no rewinding to a version of this family where the lies hadn't already begun to rot. That one question, "How's the apartment I got you?" had opened a door. And now, I was ready to walk through it. That night, Grandpa asked if he could see where I lived. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because letting someone into my space felt like letting them see the bruises I'd hidden for years. The silence, the choices I was forced to make, the lies I'd swallowed just to keep going. But I nodded. We drove in silence. Grandpa's hand stayed tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. I watched the streetlights flicker over his face. He looked older tonight, not because of time, but because of disappointment. When we pulled up outside the old dry cleaner, he squinted at the cracked brick, the crooked stairwell, the faded "for rent" sign someone had never bothered to take down. "This is it?" he asked softly. "This is it," I said. I led him up the back stairs. One step wobbled. I caught his elbow instinctively. At the top, I jiggled the doorknob the right way. It stuck if you didn't pull hard and open the door. The smell hit first. Old cigarettes and damp carpet. I flipped the switch and the overhead light flickered, humming like it was trying not to die. "Welcome to my palace," I said dryly. He didn't laugh. His eyes moved slowly across the room over the peeling ceiling tiles, the mattress on the floor with no frame, the plastic bins stacked where a dresser should have been. A tiny hot plate sat on a wobbly table. The walls were yellowed, and not from paint. Grandpa stepped inside, then sat down carefully on the edge of the mattress. It creaked under his weight. He let out a breath long and slow. "How long have you lived here?" "Since the summer after college." He ran a hand through his thinning gray hair. "I had no idea, Lena. Your dad told me you got a condo downtown. Said you were settling in well. Thriving." I scoffed. "I asked him for a job lead once. You know what he said? Flip burgers first. Builds character." Grandpa's jaw clenched. "He told me you didn't want help. That you were proud. Ungrateful, even." I looked at him then. I was never ungrateful. I just stopped asking. It felt better than being humiliated. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I want to fix this." I folded my arms. "How?" "I want to see where the money went. All of it. If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, then your father stole from both of us, and I'm done letting people lie to me." I didn't speak right away, but something in my chest, something I'd kept locked up, tight shifted. "All right," I whispered. He stood up, gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Tomorrow, we go to the bank." The next morning, Grandpa was already dressed when I woke up, slacks pressed, shirt buttoned to the collar, and his old leather shoes polished like he was preparing for war. He was on the phone with someone named Howard. "I don't care if it's short notice," he said firmly. "She's my granddaughter. I need the appointment today." He met my eyes and nodded once. "Get ready. We're going downtown." I didn't ask questions. We arrived at the bank just before noon. It smelled like wood polish and money, the kind of place where people spoke in hushed tones and signatures carried weight. Grandpa had called in favors. His lawyer was already waiting, briefcase in hand, stone-faced. A woman in a navy suit led us to a small office tucked behind frosted glass. She looked mid-50s, sharp bob haircut, fingers stacked with modest rings. She introduced herself as Ms. Klein. "I've accessed the records you requested, Mr. Thomas," she said to Grandpa, turning her monitor toward us. "According to your bank history, you initiated a wire transfer to a Daniel Parker 4 years ago marked as a gift for Lena's condo." She clicked. A screen popped up. The date, the amount, $75,000, the memo, all there. I stared at it, like if I looked hard enough, the truth would erase the last 4 years of struggle. Grandpa didn't blink. "And after that?" She clicked again. There was a second transaction 5 days later. The full amount was transferred to a private investment account under Daniel Parker's name. There's no mention of a property, no further outgoing payment, and no co-owner. It appears he kept the money. My throat tightened. Grandpa leaned back, his jaw hard. "Print everything." Miss Klein stood and stepped away to retrieve the documents. Grandpa turned to me. "He lied to both of us," he said, voice low but steady. "This isn't just family drama. This is theft." I nodded slowly, fingers curling into fists in my lap. He made me feel like I was the problem, that needing help meant I was weak. Grandpa's expression darkened. "He manipulated my trust and your dignity. That ends now." Ms. Klein returned with a folder of printed statements and a copy of the wire notes. Grandpa thanked her, shook her hand, then tucked the folder under his arm like it was ammunition. As we walked out, he looked over at me. "We're not letting this go quietly." I exhaled. "Good." Back in the car, he handed me the folder. I took it, the weight of truth, finally in my hands. It didn't fix the past, but it gave me something I hadn't had in years. Proof. And I knew exactly what we needed to do next. That afternoon, Grandpa didn't ask if I was ready. He just said, "We're going now." I knew where now meant my parents' house. I hadn't stepped inside in almost 2 years. It was the same beige colonial I grew up in, with the cracked driveway and the wind chimes Mom insisted were healing. But as we pulled up, it didn't feel like home. It felt like walking into enemy territory. Grandpa rang the doorbell, his posture impossibly straight. I stood beside him, folder clutched in my arms like armor. Dad answered. The surprise on his face flickered to annoyance in seconds. Dad? Lena? What's going on? We need to talk, Grandpa said, calm, controlled. I'm kind of… Now, Grandpa interrupted, still not shouting, but final. We stepped inside. The house looked the same, but I noticed details I hadn't before. Dust on the corners, mail piled up. A framed photo of my sister's graduation front and center on the shelf. None of mine. Mom emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands. She smiled weakly. Lena, this is a surprise. Isn't it just? I murmured. Grandpa sat in the living room, motioning for everyone else to follow. My mom hovered. My dad crossed his arms. My sister leaned halfway down the stairs, eyes darting between us like she smelled drama. Once seated, Grandpa pulled the folder from under his coat and placed it carefully on the coffee table. Dad didn't look at it. I transferred $75,000 to you, Grandpa said plainly, with the understanding it was for Lena's apartment. You told me she had moved in, that she was happy, that she sent a thank you card. I felt the blood drain from my face. A thank you card? Dad rubbed his temple. Dad, this is really… Don't lie to me, Grandpa cut in, sharper now. We went to the bank. He opened the folder and slid the printed pages forward. Bank statements, transfer history, names, dates, proof. You didn't buy her an apartment. You moved the money into your own investments, and you let your daughter live in a moldy attic while pretending you were the generous father. My mom stared at the paper. Daniel, tell me this isn't true. Dad's eyes flared. I was holding it for her. For later. For when she was ready to be responsible. You told me I was lazy, I said, my voice cold. That I needed to earn everything on my own. That I didn't deserve help. Meanwhile, you were sitting on money meant for me. He stood. You don't understand how these things work. Sit down, Grandpa snapped. Everyone flinched. I'd never heard him speak like that. This isn't a misunderstanding, Grandpa continued. It's theft, and if you think I'll sit back and let you lie to my face again, you don't know me as well as you thought. My sister looked stunned. Mom started crying. Grandpa reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter. He set it beside the papers. You're going to read this out loud, he told Dad. Dad scoffed. Absolutely not. Then I walk away, Grandpa said, rising. From everything. You lose your inheritance, your accounts, your access, everything. The room went still. Dad sat back down. His hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. His voice was thin, hollow. To my family. I took funds meant for Lena Parker's future. I used them without her knowledge or consent. I have wronged her and my father, and I accept full responsibility. I will repay the amount in full within 6 months. Silence followed. The only sound was the creak of the ceiling fan. For the first time in years, I looked at my father and felt nothing. No fear, no hunger for approval, no ache. Just space. Grandpa turned to me. You're moving in with me next week. I've already called the realtor. We'll find you a real place, a real start. I nodded slowly. Dad didn't meet my eyes. Not once. The man who used to say, "You'll never make it without me," looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. And I realized he was wrong. I already had. The next morning, I woke up in Grandpa's guest room. The mattress was firm. The window opened. The air smelled like old books and lemon polish, not mildew. I lay there for a while, just breathing. No pipes groaning behind the walls, no neighbor's music bleeding through the ceiling, no cigarette smoke curling beneath the door. Just quiet. Peaceful, unfamiliar, quiet. Downstairs, Grandpa was already on the phone. I heard him through the floorboards, calm but commanding. Yes, I want a full inspection. I don't want her living anywhere with bad wiring or mold. And no basement units. She deserves light. He didn't say it loudly, but I heard every word. That afternoon, we toured 3 apartments. The last one had tall windows, pale oak floors, and a little alcove that could fit a desk. I stood in the empty living room, sunlight spilling across the bare walls, and felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't just shelter. It was dignity. "It's yours if you want it," Grandpa said. "Lease is ready." I blinked at him. "Just like that?" "No more hoops. No more begging," he said simply. "You say yes, we sign. That's it." I nodded. I didn't cry, but something in me softened. By the end of the week, I had a new address. A real address. No letters taped to doors, no cash-only leases, no pretending to the landlord that I was just between jobs. For the first time in 4 years, I unpacked without shame. I bought a second-hand couch from a local thrift store. Grandpa insisted on paying for a new mattress. I chose linen curtains that let in light, but softened the afternoon glare. Every piece I brought in felt intentional. Chosen. Mine. The first night I spent there alone, I sat on the edge of my bed, a real bed, off the floor and looked around. It wasn't big, it wasn't flashy, but it was safe, quiet, bright. And no one could take it from me. The next morning, I opened my laptop. Not for job applications or rent calculators, but for something I hadn't touched in years. A folder, labeled Designs. Inside were old sketches, mood boards, layout drafts I'd created back in college, before the bills piled up, before the rejection letters, before my dad looked at my portfolio and said, "It's cute, but when are you going to get serious?" This time, I didn't hear his voice. This time, I heard my own. And it whispered, "Start again." So I did. I updated my portfolio, cleaned up my website, and opened a freelance profile. I submitted work to local design studios, pitched small concepts, uploaded mock-ups of compact living spaces, multifunctional storage, cozy corners for people who knew what it meant to live in tight rooms and tighter budgets. I designed for people like me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to survive. I was building. A few weeks later, I got an email. Subject line: "We loved your space, saving studio mock-up. Can we talk?" It was from a small but reputable architecture firm that specialized in community housing initiatives. They were starting a project to redesign transitional apartments for young adults, low-cost, high-function, human-centered. They needed someone who understood how to make the most of limited space. I smiled. I had lived that. When I showed up for the interview, I wore the same beige trench coat my mom once called cheap-looking. I walked into a modest office downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows, not unlike the ones in my new place, and waited in the lobby. The creative director shook my hand, firm and warm. "We were really impressed with your layout submissions. They weren't just clever, they felt, lived in." "I guess that's because they are," I said honestly. We talked for nearly an hour, not about my resume, not about degrees or connections, but about feeling cold in winter when heating costs too much, about turning hallway closets into pantries, about where to place a reading light if the ceiling has no sockets. When the director asked how I developed that eye for detail, I didn't flinch. "I spent 4 years in an attic apartment above a dry cleaner," I said. "No insulation, one outlet and barely enough space to stretch my legs." She didn't pity me. She nodded. And that's when I knew. I wasn't being seen as someone who needed help anymore. I was being seen as someone who could offer it. By the end of the meeting, she handed me a folder. "We'd like to bring you on for the pilot phase," she said. "Freelance at first, but if it goes well, we're looking for permanent staff." It wasn't just a job. It was proof. Proof that I was never lazy, never a lost cause, never ungrateful or undeserving. I was someone who adapted, learned, fought. Someone who built. That evening, Grandpa made spaghetti and opened a bottle of wine. He toasted me at the dinner table, just the two of us. "To starting again," he said, "but this time, on your terms." I clinked my glass against his. To proof. Because that's what I had now. Proof that I wasn't who they said I was. Proof that the basement didn't define me. Proof that even after being buried, you can still grow. My dad repaid the money. Exactly 6 months later, just like he promised in the letter, every cent returned in quiet, electronic silence. No call, no note. No apology beyond the one he was forced to read that day in the living room. I watched the final deposit land in Grandpa's account, and I felt nothing. Not relief, not vindication. Just space, the kind of space that opens up after you stop bleeding, when the pain isn't gone, but it no longer rules you. My mom didn't reach out either. She had hovered behind my father that day, eyes wide but mouth shut, like a bystander watching a storm from behind glass. For months afterward, she sent photos to Grandpa, updates on the garden, the dog, her book club. Never a message for me. Not a word about what happened. Not even a lie. I think that hurt worse than the betrayal. Her silence was its own kind of confession, not of guilt, but of comfort. She was comfortable with what had happened, and she didn't plan to change. As for my sister, she moved out of state 2 months after the confrontation. No goodbye, just a tagged photo on Instagram, her posing in front of palm trees with a caption that said, "Leaving the past behind." I didn't like it. I didn't comment. And yet, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to fix it. I didn't reach out. I didn't try to explain my side. I let them go. Sometimes peace isn't found in reunion. Sometimes it's found in release. One day, a letter arrived at Grandpa's house. It was from my father's attorney, a typed, sanitized statement acknowledging the repayment and closing the matter, formally and without contest. I read it once, folded it, and placed it in the drawer beneath my sketchbooks. Not as a keepsake. As a record? A receipt for everything they chose not to say. That weekend, I repainted the walls of my apartment. I chose soft greens and pale blues, colors that felt like oxygen. I replaced the thrifted curtains with sheer linen ones and bought a new lamp that turned on with a single soft tap. At night, I lit a candle and listened to jazz. Sometimes I danced in my kitchen while the pasta boiled, the windows wide open. And I didn't wonder whether my family missed me, because I didn't miss them. Not in the way I used to, that hungry, desperate ache for their approval. Now, I miss the idea of family. The kind I used to imagine when I was little, warm, safe, kind. But then I'd look over at Grandpa reading the paper on my balcony, humming to himself with his glasses slipping down his nose, and I'd realize, maybe I didn't lose a family. Maybe I just finally found the part that mattered. 3 months later, I hosted brunch. Not in a restaurant. Not in someone else's house. Mine. The table wasn't huge, but it held real plates, folded napkins, and a vase of fresh sunflowers Grandpa brought that morning. The light poured through the windows like it had been waiting for this moment. There were only 6 of us close friends, a coworker from the design firm and, of course, Grandpa, who took his seat at the head of the table without asking. I let him. He'd earned it. He looked around, eyes crinkled in a quiet smile. "You did all this yourself?" I nodded. Every last scone. My coworker raised a glass. To Lena for getting the job, the view, and the life she deserves. We clinked. I laughed. It was soft, easy, the kind of laugh that doesn't carry armor underneath it. There was no mention of my parents. No empty chairs. No tension waiting behind closed doors. Just food, friends, and light. After everyone left, I stood in the doorway and watched the sun begin to dip, casting golden light across the room. Grandpa joined me, holding his coffee like it was the last thing he'd ever need. "This," he said, "is what I imagined when I sent that money." I turned toward him, touched his hand. "You gave me more than an apartment," I said. "You gave me a beginning." He smiled faintly. "No, you gave that to yourself. I just opened a door." I looked around at the home I built, not just the walls or the windows or the furniture, but the peace, the safety, the stillness. And I knew for the first time that I didn't have to keep proving I was worthy of love. I already was. And this life? It was mine.